Good evening. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this conversation about election integrity and the vital importance of counting every vote in every election. I'm Stephanie Kurtzman, and I'm honored to lead the Gephardt Institute for Civic and Community Engagement based at Washington University in St. Louis. Former Congressman Dick Gephardt, one of tonight's panelists, founded the Gephardt Institute 15 years ago to invest in future generations of civic leaders, citizens, change agents, and stewards of our democracy. Our democracy depends on the voices and participation of all of our citizens. Nowhere is this citizen voice more vital, more essential, or more powerful than at the ballot box. Citizens must make their voices heard by showing up to vote, and their votes must be counted, no matter how long it takes. Thank you for joining us to explore how each of us can support the integrity of our elections with an eye toward November 3rd and an enduring commitment to this bedrock of American democracy. I am grateful to our panelists and moderator for engaging us in this important discussion, and to our event co-sponsors, the School of Law and the Brown School at Washington University. It's now my pleasure to introduce Gary Parker, Associate Dean for External Affairs and Director of the Clark Fox Policy Institute at the Brown School.
Thank you, Stephanie. On behalf of Brown School Dean Mary McKay, who's teaching via Zoom this evening, and the Clark Fox Policy Institute, and the entire Brown School community, I want to thank you for spending some time with us tonight. The Brown School offers graduate education in social work, public health, and social policy. We're dedicated to equity and committed to impact. We recognize that in order to protect and empower vulnerable populations and counter oppressive systems, we need a healthy and robust democracy, which entails engaged voters and ensuring that every vote is counted. And that's why I'm so grateful to the Gephardt Center and all they do to encourage civic and community engagement on campus and beyond. I'm very much looking forward to tonight's discussion, and I appreciate the opportunity to greet each of you. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Nancy Stout, who is Dean of Washington University's School of Law and the Howard and Caroline King Distinguished Professor of Law.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Gary. And hello from St. Louis. I'm so glad that you've all joined us. We have a fantastic panel this evening and so much to talk about. We are on the eve of a historic election, and there are many, many issues that we as individual voters, citizens, or just observers want to understand, and our panel will help us do so. We have four amazing panelists tonight. We have Congressman Dick Gephardt. Richard Gephardt served for 28 years in the United States House of Representatives, representing Missouri's 3rd Congressional District, home to his birthplace of St. Louis. We also have Congresswoman Deborah Price. Deborah served as Congresswoman in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1993 to 2008. As the House Republican Conference Chairman, she was the 4th highest ranking member of Congress and the highest ranking Republican woman in the history of the House. We also have Ambassador Tim Roemer. Tim served in the House of Representatives for 12 years, representing Indiana's 3rd District, and was appointed Ambassador to India from 2009 to 2011. And finally, we have Congressman Zach Womp. Zach served in the House of Representatives for 16 years, representing Tennessee's 3rd District. He served as the ranking member of the Military Construction Veterans Affairs Subcommittee, and prior to that, as the ranking member of the Legislative Branch Subcommittee of the House Appropriations Committee, which he served for 14 years. Thank you for joining us. This is an important group of panelists, and I'm so excited to hear what's next. Congressman Gephardt, I'm going to start with you and ask you to speak a little bit about the National Council on Election Integrity, an important group that cares very much about the issues that we'll speak about this evening. As you put it, this is a group that puts country before politics. Over to you, Congressman.
Great, thank you, Nancy, so much, and thank all of the folks who've worked hard to put this event together. We really appreciate it. I am honored to be with my 3 former colleagues from the House of Representatives. Deborah and Zach are are Republicans. Tim and I are Democrats. And we are now part of a group that we put together over the last month called the National Council for Election Integrity. And the reason we came together is because we all shared a concern about whether or not this election in the midst of a historic pandemic could be successful or valid or accepted by all the people at the end of the voting. And so we put together 20 or so Republican and 20 or so Democratic federal officials, former federal officials. Some were members of Congress like we were. Some were cabinet secretaries, and we've got 3 4-star generals from the various services who are also in our group. This group is entirely nonpartisan and bipartisan, and we are committed together to stick together, to work together before and importantly after the election to help see if we can have a successful election. We all know the country is polarized as it's not often been in the past. And we know that it's going to take a long time in some of these states to count what will be a historic high number of absentee ballots. It could take weeks, it could take days, but in that period of time, we could enter great difficulty. We also know that there's a lot of tendency to protest, which is constitutional and quite, but we're worried about the protests turning violent at some point, which would really be catastrophic to our election process. We have raised $13 or $14 million to run ads in the 3 big swing states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And we're going to carry on a lot of other activities that Deborah and the others will talk about when they speak. I want to thank my colleagues for both being part of the National Council and for being willing to spend an hour and a half with us at the Washington Institute and the other viewers from around the country that are viewing this broadcast. So thank you. And we look forward to the questions after everybody speaks for a moment. Deborah, would you like to talk about why you joined the council and then what we're planning to do, what we're already doing and planning to do in the next days?
Yes, thank you very much, Leader. It's really an honor to be here and to have a part in everyone's concern and curiosity about the weeks to come. It's a wonderful thing for Americans to have such regard for this process that they also would take an hour and a half tonight to tune in. So thank you for everyone who is listening and has great concern about the future, the near future, and the future to come for our country. So the question comes to all of us: why did we join, and why do we want to be a part of this cause? And well, it just seems. Sorry, that's my alarm. I was supposed to wake up this morning. I guess I didn't get the right AM or PM. Anyway, we have to examine. I mean, it just seems like the right thing to do. But when I gave it more thought, really considering my own background, I won my last election after 5 weeks of recount by 0.5%. So I've been a part of this kind of tug of war and felt it very firsthand, and know how important it is to be calm and relaxed when you're actually the one whose career is on the line. My opponent and I actually went to Washington together for orientation and pre-congressional meetings and that kind of thing, because we didn't really know who was going to have the seat that year. But after the recount, it came to me, and for that I was very grateful. So I know firsthand what it would feel like and the tensions that could come from it. The second reason was that before I went to Congress, I was a judge. And one thing I learned from the bench, and I was on the bench about 9 years, was that our laws are only as good as the respect that people have for them. And it's the same thing for our law enforcement. And it will be the same thing for this election. And if people don't believe in the results and people don't have faith that this was carried on in an upright manner with as much in the way of safeguards and protections and vote counts, then they will not respect the decision. But the major reason that I wanted to be a part of this is when I was elected in 1992, and I think Ambassador Romer and Leader Gephardt were already there, and I'll get to you in a minute, Zach, but it was a time the Republicans were in the minority, and we had been in the minority in the House for 40 years. And it was a very pleasant place back then. My predecessor served for 28 years. Leader, you'll remember Chalmers Wiley, I'm sure. Right. And then things changed. They started to change because of cable TV, cable news, radio news shows. C-SPAN came into existence, and C-SPAN is a great thing. It sheds light on what's going on, but it also is a place for people, members of Congress, to use as a grandstand and as a platform and as a place where they didn't have to earn the media, they didn't have to pay for the ads, they could get free TV viewing. And I really believe in my heart that that had a major role in some of the shifting that we saw. But that election was 92. We served 2 years in the minority as Republicans, and then along came Newt Gingrich and some of the more rebellious type of activity that we've seen more and more and more and more and more of. Now, Newt is a saint to me because he got Republicans rightfully in play again, but the manner of the degrading of our relationships in Congress from when I started until when I left, it was amazing to me. And I often joke with friends that I left Congress with some Democrat friends, and I'm so glad I got out when I did, because it doesn't happen that way very often anymore. And so what I want people to do is have faith in these election results so that we can gradually turn our country back to having more civility in our government, more faith in our government. And unless we believe in these election results, that won't happen. Now, some of the things that this Council for Election Integrity is doing, and Dick kind of touched on this, is that raising money to alert people that this could be touch and go, it could be touchy, it could be scary, but we want people to vote. We have launched campaigns to make sure that people know that they can vote, know how they can vote, to be very patient through the process of voting, and to be prepared. To be prepared to be uncomfortable, be prepared to maybe wait, to be prepared for some confusion, be prepared for bullies along the way, perhaps, and then to have a plan and make sure that you use that plan to vote, because your vote is the only way that you can help direct our country. Many of the ads we have in place for some of the swing states will happen after the election, actually, to try to calm people and try to help them understand how important it is that every vote is counted, that every voice matters, and that The integrity of not only our election, but of our government is at stake, and to just be calm and patient. And I'm sure that we're doing much, much more than that, but that's a thumbnail sketch of what I know that we're doing. And so others may be able to speak to other efforts that the council is partaking in. But thank you for allowing me to share a little bit of my history and why it's so important to me to make this election one that is full of integrity. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah, so much. That was a great statement. I appreciate you being with us. Tim?
Sure, Leader. Thank you for bringing us all together, Dick Gephardt. You are, as you said, you're both a thinker and a doer, and it's always fun to be part of your team to get things done and be successful at helping our country. So it's an honor to be with you and join your efforts once again. I want to salute Deborah and Zach, two friends of mine. I can actually call them friends. We were friends in Congress. They are friends today. And it takes courage to be part of this National Council, to stand up for the right thing and resist party pressures. And Zach and Deborah are key parts of this council, and their integrity rides with us every step of the way. I also want to give a shout out to the Gephardt Institute and Washington University. There couldn't be a more perfect time for a place like the Gephardt Institute to be, one, engaging young people and students and teaching them about elections and how to make a difference, and two, engaging them and teaching them about government and how to pass a law and get things done. We have a lot of opportunities for people coming up in the next few years to get involved in local, state, and federal elections and federal office and helping us govern the country. So I'm very excited to be here on the Zoom conference call, learning more about the great work that the Gephardt Institute does. Now, why am I part of this? Why do I think this is important? Having served as a U.S. ambassador in the biggest democracy in the world, in India, where 1.3 billion people are a part of a voting system, it is incredible and inspiring to see such a big democracy have elections at the local and the state and their federal level. That is so inspiring to see young people take their grandparents to the polls. Virtually, we saw people carrying others to the polls. We were inspired by democracy in different places. I also served on the 9/11 Commission, and we heard riveting testimony from Flight 93 about passengers that had just been hijacked. And they knew from calls from loved ones that they weren't getting hijacked to go to Cuba. They were going to die. The hijackers were going to take the plane into a building, as two planes had already crashed. And so on Flight 93, they did two things. They voted to do something about it, and they took action and went into the cockpit, and the plane crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and it did not hit the White House or the Capitol. We thought it was pointed toward the Capitol building by the terrorists. So those are, as well as living in the oldest democracy in the world, those are examples of the power of voting and the history of voting, both in the world and in the United States. We have to protect that essential bedrock principle of our voices as we, the people, picking who we want to represent us and then govern and try to do the right things for our country. If we cannot have a peaceful government election, if we can't have transition to power or maintenance of power, then democracy crumbles and erodes. So we are part of this National Council on Election Integrity. Please go to counteveryvote.org. Take the pledge that we've pledged for patience, peace, and the constitutional process moving forward, and help us through this difficult time to count every vote and have a fair election and accept the winner. Dick also gave me, Leader also gave me a very tough job, and that was to try to set out a couple dates after November 3rd which are consequential, especially they could be consequential if we have a very, very close election. What happens in the days ahead? First day, as we all know, is November 3rd, the election. And that's kind of the count day. Voters have voted, we're counting the votes. Next, we have a period from November 4th to November 23rd, more votes counted. We have historic record early voting now, people going to the polls on Saturdays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays. We have mail-in voting. We have to count those votes. And in Pennsylvania and North Carolina, votes can be received until November the 6th. If they're postmarked in time, they can be counted up to 3 days after the election. In Deborah's home state, in Ohio, they can be received until November 13th or counted if they're postmarked appropriately. So when somebody says, as the president said today, that all the votes should be counted by November 3rd, that is not honoring our Constitution or our state laws. All of our state laws and our Constitution say, allow this process to take place. On November 10th to December 11th, states are certifying the election results. They're going forward to make sure that those votes have been properly counted, and they have a very, very careful process, nonpartisan people doing that. December 8th is called Safe Harbor to determine election results and begin to assign the electors at the Electoral College. The governors are supposed to create certifications of ascertainment listing who the winner was in their state, and also put together the slate of electors who will actually elect the president. Then we come to December 14th. The electoral votes are cast. That's a key day, and this is very important. Many state laws require electors to actually support the winner of their state, and there can be a penalty for somebody not being faithful. They call them faithful or unfaithful electors. So there could be a penalty if somebody doesn't represent their state's interests. And then we come to December 23rd, electoral votes must arrive in Washington, D.C. That gives a little time from the 14th to the 23rd to get there. Maybe that's the old horses and buggy, not the system we have today. January 3rd, the new Congress is sworn in. And why is that important? Because on January 6th, the elector votes are counted. The House and Senate members will meet in the House chambers. Vice President Pence will oversee the process. There'll be 2 appointees from each of the 2 houses in the Senate and the House. They will count the votes and determine who the president is. And if there is not a winner, there is a system of the 435 electoral votes, you need 270 to win. If there's no winner, then there's a vote within that body. And we can go into, more of what happens next if the House determines it like they have in the past. I won't get into all the gory details of past elections and what might happen and the creation of the 12th Amendment back in 1800 to try to clarify some of this. I will leave it for some of the questions to get into that, and just get ready for one of the best parts of the presentation. We'll be listening to the questions. With that, let me turn it back over to Leader Gephardt.
Thanks, Tim, so much, and thanks for being here. Zach, over to you.
Well, thank you, Leader Gephardt, for your service and for the way you've carried yourself, and to my colleagues, Ambassador Romer and Chairwoman Price. What a privilege to be with you tonight. In order to understand what brought me to this, let me walk back and tell you kind of where I come from, because I grew up in a Southern Democrat family and went to the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And as a freshman, I went to Woolen Gym and voted for Jimmy Carter for president in 1976. 4 years later, I was still there. It says something about me. And I went back to Woolen Gym and I voted for Ronald Reagan for president. And then I took 3 carloads of my fraternity brothers at Sigma Nu House to Washington, D.C. for the election night party. And I shook hands with Tennessee U.S. Senator Howard Baker, and I was a Republican from that point forward. I ended up serving in a lot of different levels in the Republican Party before I ran for Congress against an incumbent, Marilyn Lloyd, who y'all served with, and I lost. And then I ran again and I won, and I served 8 terms. But I adhere to a principle that my former Democrat colleague, John Tanner from Tennessee, taught me early on, and that is neither party has an exclusive on integrity. And I actually expanded his quote and used it a million times, and it's in print. Neither party has an exclusive on integrity or ideas. And I really believe that. And I believe one of our fundamental problems with our tribalism today is the respect for one another has evaporated. And blame has become a political weapon in the last 20 years. And it's easier to blame than it is to accept responsibility. And it's easier to walk away than it is to hammer out a compromise. But that's not the American tradition. That's not the American way. And we have to restore that. So for the last 4 years, Ambassador Romer and I have co-chaired an influential group called the Reformers Caucus of Issue 1. Issue 1's a 5-year-old nonprofit outside group, completely cross-partisan, pushing reforms that would restore confidence in the institutions of government at the federal level. We have a robust agenda, but we have over 200 former members of Congress and cabinet officials in our coalition. And actually 20 of these Council on Election Integrity come from our reformers group because it's an influential group that was already in place. And if there was ever a moment where we're important to step forward, it's now. Why? Because we're so tribal that the good news is a lot of people are voting because there's a great interest. The bad news is we were so tribal going into this, very little undecided. So the campaign has been more about going against each other than who is going to try to capture the middle. There is no middle. There's no middle left. And we've had some violence. And I believe, because I don't believe either party has the exclusive on integrity or ideas, I believe that both parties have the potential of their extreme supporters going into the streets in a violent way. Either party, I think, this could happen on either side. And theoretically, either party could protest the outcome of the election. I know the president, who's a Republican, has made a lot more noise about this and drawn a lot of attention to it. But I think this cuts both ways at some level. And this is where we have to put our country above our party. Let me tell you, the process of a peaceful transfer of power and a free and fair and honest election is far more important than a man named Trump or a man named Biden. It's far more important than either party. It's even more important than how passionate we believe in our own ideology. I'm a Southern conservative. I have a deep set of ideological beliefs, but I believe in the United States of America and our constitutional process, and I have confidence in it that transcends my own personal beliefs. That is the American tradition. If we don't rely on that and count on that and come together as people, and all of us go to 30,000 feet and look down on this election with calm, with a measured response, and encourage our fellow citizens to look at this as an important time in history, we must show the world that even during a pandemic, even during the moment of tribalism, even when we're this divided, even when we got a rambunctious disruptor as a president, and I would argue the disruption was coming. It was either going to be Sanders disrupting the Democrat Party or Trump disrupting the Republican Party. There's disruption brewing for 20 years. So the disruptor made it. He's the president, and he makes a lot of noise, and he's a unique individual in history, and they'll be writing about it forever. But listen, I'm more interested in our country and the continuity of this way of life. And I want the world to look back and say, well, I'll be darned. The United States actually carried out a free and fair election. And even though there were some people rattling their sabers, they calmed them down and they peacefully transferred power or retained power, depending on how it goes. And we actually have an inauguration and everybody comes back together. But even after that's done, we have to start respecting each other again. That is paramount, that public service becomes a noble cause again. This is not the dumbing down of America, and whoever says the most outrageous things gets elected, and whoever is the most negative against the other person gets elected. That is not our tradition. That's not our history. It's not even our DNA. It's our worst instincts. We must reject those and come together as people. That's why I'm still in this game, because I want my grandchildren to look up to public service and not down their nose at public service. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Zach. I think all of you who are watching this can now see why I'm so honored to have these three individuals on this video cast. These are great people. They're patriots, they're public servants, and they've given a significant part of their lives to this country. So that's why we're together. So thank you all for being part of this. Nancy, you want to kick off some questions?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for those wonderful comments. And let me begin with a statement that your organization, which is a fantastic and wonderful organization, that your organization makes. This election will test what all Americans have had to come to expect from our strong democracy: a peaceful transfer or retention of power between the leaders of our two parties and an electorate that fundamentally trusts the system that declares the winner. You've talked about this worry that we won't have a peaceful transition of power, and you've talked about what you're planning to do with regard to ads and perhaps more. Could you elaborate on this? Do you in fact think we won't have a peaceful transition? And what are some of the ideas that you have, you and your group, to help calm the waters?
Well, I'll take a stab first and the others should chime in. I never thought we'd be in this place. I never believed that we would have a troubled election in this country. Elections are always difficult. We had Robin Carnahan, who used to be our Secretary of State in Missouri, the other day on another Zoom that we were on. She's part of our group, incidentally, say that when you look at all the complexities of having an election, she's always believed that every election is a miracle because of all the people and all the technology and all the things that have to be done and what the voters have to do and so on and so forth. And she's right. But we always assumed this. I never thought about election workers. They were just going to do this. And now we have to really address all of this. As Zach said, we're as polarized and divided as we've been in my lifetime, maybe since the Civil War. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's no one reason. There are a lot of reasons we can think of, but that's the fact. That's where we are. And so you knew that when you add the pandemic to that and what that does to people's willingness to vote in person, this could really be a difficult election. We are 240 years old. We have done elections during national crises many times. In the Civil War, World War I, World War II, other conflicts after 9/11, we pulled it off flawlessly. And I think we're going to do it again now. But you can't take it for granted. You've got to get people informed and educated of the differences that are present now. That's why we're running ads. All of us are willing to go in the media and talk in our states and in other states. I've been on 10 Zoom conferences in Pennsylvania with the University of Pennsylvania Law School, the Pennsylvania Bar Association tomorrow, Muhlenberg College, and other groups. We've talked to the governor's office in these states, the secretaries of state. We talked to election officials. So we're doing a lot of activities, not just running ads, but trying to really get into the whole infrastructure of this election and help people be prepared. I was a Boy Scout. We used to have a motto, be prepared. So we want people to be prepared and to face the difficulties if they happen. We hope they don't, but if they happen, we can face those difficulties, deal with them successfully. And as I always say on almost every call, we got to land this plane, and we are going to land this plane.
Thank you. To the other panelists, would you like to weigh in?
I'll jump in if I don't hear from Deborah and Zach. Maybe a Democrat go a Republican after a Democrat. Zach, do you want to go first?
You go ahead, Ambassador.
Deb, would you like to go?
You're on mute.
Okay.
Congresswoman, you're muted.
I would just say that I'm involved because about 6 months ago, for the first time, a sitting president started to talk about maybe, there was going to be, a narrative coming from the White House that, there wouldn't be this peaceful transfer of power. But even more important than that, there were two other things happening. One is, and Deborah, Congresswoman Price talked about this a little bit earlier, we have had growing dysfunction in our government. People, Zach and I played basketball together when we served in Congress. We had friends over, Republican friends to our house for dinner and their kids. And we got to know families and people really well from both, sides of the aisle. You don't throw vile out at people when you know them and you know their families and respect them like they are today. So you saw this dysfunction and this almost hatred for one another, for America. We're fellow Americans, fellow citizens, and we've degraded ourselves that people want to destroy each other rather than just run an election and somebody wins and somebody loses. And then finally, the other factor, and I think Zach talked about this eloquently, is this was happening way before 2016. Mm-hmm. Social media started to divide people. We have the cable networks that are dividing people all the time. We have, we just have a lot going in our society that is splitting people up even more. So there was the likelihood even 6 months ago that coming into this election, it could be extraordinary. It could be like no other, and that we could face these problems. And so, this group came together, this National Council on Election Integrity, with a pledge that we would all pledge for peace, for patience, for the constitutional process going forward, and that we try to get Americans on this pledge. I hope they will, and go to the website and join us, because we can't get this, 42 people can't get this thing done. It takes the American people coming together at the grassroots to ensure that we have a peaceful and fair and secure election, and we count every vote. So I'm honored to be with Deborah and Zach and Dick and all my colleagues to work on one of the most important things we will work on in our lifetime, and that's our democratic principles and our democratic vote.
And as we wait for the next two answers, could you elaborate a little bit on whether you are imagining, if there is violence, would that be the electorate, or would the military of the United States of America be leveraged? And
I'll answer that.
Please.
Unless you want to take that back, Tim. But I don't think that there's any way in the world that our military would be or will be leveraged. That I not in my wildest imagination. Now, we might see some help from our National Guardsmen in certain states, but I do not think that our military will become involved. I don't even, and this is just my opinion, I don't think we're going to see a lot of violence. Now, maybe I'm just being Pollyannish here, but I think there are good signs. I think there are some signs that we saw two candidates for governor in Utah standing on the same stage calling for, come together. In Ohio, we saw Sherrod Brown and Bob Taft, who years ago had one of the ugliest races for Secretary of State, come together and call for this. And we just need that. We need that from all sectors, not just politicians. We need that from the right and the left, in Hollywood, in Wall Street, everywhere. Come together, both sides, and ask the American people. And I think that that's a charge that we as the council can help with. It's just a matter of people understanding that no good will come of it. Now, some people don't need a reason to act badly. We've all been in second grade, you know, and some people just don't grow up like others do. And but I think that there are good signs, and God help us if our military ever has to become engaged.
So Dr. Stout, I don't think our military is ever going to be engaged either. And I'll tell you why. But, you know, to me, my hope and prayer is that this is like Y2K, that we're preparing for the worst, but it's not. You know, I hope that's what's happening, but we prepared for Y2K. Why? Because we didn't know. Now here, you know, the old adage, where there's smoke, there's fire. That's why we're preparing. There is smoke. If reporting is accurate, there are militia groups on one side, and we know there's Antifa that has a tendency to protest the other side with violence. So it's out there. You know, the question is that, you know, if it's a Y2K, we're going to have a winner and we know it and we accept it. Here's what I'm counting on, and I believe this is very important. I believe still today, even in this tribal time, there are plenty of people in office at the highest level, in the United States Senate, United States House, from both parties, that will not tolerate an unacceptance of the outcome or the excessive influence of the forces from incumbents to try to protect themselves. I believe that won't be tolerated. At the end of the day, the outcome of the election will be accepted. We've seen Leader McConnell say clearly, publicly, the winner is going to be the winner and the loser will concede. And I believe there are a lot of his Republican colleagues in the Senate that feel exactly the same way. And that after the discussions and the votes are counted, even if there's a legal challenge, which we had, as you know, in the year 2000, it was December before we knew. That's why it's so important for us to exist. We have no statutory authority in this council, but we all have a constituency. We all have a vantage point. Collectively, we have some exposure to say to the public, let's remain calm. Let's be patient. Let's trust the process. Let's trust the states that have been diligent for months in preparation. Under their law, whatever challenges, you've seen Pennsylvania ask for more time. Wisconsin asked for more time. Whatever the courts and the legislatures have determined has been determined. So whatever it is, Pennsylvania has to have them all counted by Friday. So by next Friday, the clock is going to stop. And then they'll have them all counted. But you can't add any more ballots after a certain period of time. Under the rules, there's going to be a winner and there's going to be a loser. And I believe the leaders of the country will come to the defense of the system, not either candidate.
Nancy, I used to always say that democracy or politics is a substitute for violence. And I still believe that. I also believe, when I was leader for 14 years of the Democrats in the House, that I was in awe every time we had a really tough, bitterly contested vote on some big issue, that the losing side, and by losing side, I mean not just the members that were involved in the argument, but the people out in the country they were representing. The losing side was grudgingly willing to accept the result because they thought the process was fair. And that's what we're in danger of losing now. Both sides in the last 3 months have been saying that they think the other side is cheating in this election. And if that frame of mind carries on widely in the country, we're going to have trouble getting people to accept the result because they won't think the process was fair. And part of what we're doing here with our effort, our little effort, is to try to reassure Americans that this process is fair. We can do this. Our friends and neighbors are the election officials in our local communities. They take their job very seriously. They're working hard to make this come out right. And we need to respect them as Zach was saying a moment ago. We need to respect each other, and we need to respect them and the hard work that they're doing to allow us to have a successful election.
Well said.
Thank you. Thank you. That is a great segue to my next question. National security in our elections has been a growing concern. Last week, for example, the FBI held a press conference revealing Iran and Russia's attempts to interfere with the 2020 presidential election. How do you think about this type of interference? And does your group have thoughts on how we as an electorate can think about this and fight back against that problem?
Tim, why don't you start?
Well, I would say, first of all, Nancy, Dick, do you want to go first?
No, go, Tim.
First of all, Nancy, I think there was some good news and some bad news in that report from the FBI and from our intelligence directors. The good news is that they found that the Russians, the Iranians, maybe other hostile actors had not changed any of the voter files, or had they altered any election tallies. So they're trying to sow disinformation in our campaigns. That's the bad news. They're further trying to divide people. That's a threat to us. That's a national security issue. And we need to address those things through our foreign policy, through our cyber policy, through our cyber command. When I helped to recruit Dan Coates, who's the former director of national intelligence, to our council, Dan said something, that grabbed me, by the throat. And he said, "I'm worried about foreign actors, but I'm more worried about the self-harm we can do internally to one another." And so I think that's where our council has really been focused, Nancy, is what do we do that we can do here domestically to bring people together, to respect one another, to try to make sure the Constitution and the local laws are abided by. Deb was talking about, trying to make sure that the process, we have a process. If there is a close election, we know how long to count the votes, and then they have to stop. We know how the electors are put forward and when they have to vote in Washington. And if they can't resolve something, there are all kinds of solutions that can help them resolve and ultimately end up in picking a president. So if we are calm and patient and peaceful and respectful to each other, this process, even going through some hiccups and turbulence, even from some outside forces, we're going to be able to navigate our path successfully through this.
Yeah, Nancy, if I could pick up on that, one of our big challenges today is disinformation, domestically and from overseas. We saw it in the 2016 election, we saw it in the 2018 election, and now, yes, we're going to see it to a certain extent in the 2020 election. But that's an issue for after this process. And one of the things that the Director of National Intelligence, former Senator Dan Coates, that's part of our council, also has advocated that our council supports is a commission on election integrity after this cycle, just like the 9/11 commission, because we know that there are systemic challenges now, and we've seen them. We've seen them all year as we've prepared for this election, from funding to some kind of protocols to how you vote in which states. We don't want to nationalize it because it's good that the states have some autonomy, but we need some standards. And from journalism schools to political science and government schools, we have got to come together as a nation on fact versus fiction. There's so much misinformation today. Yeah. People don't know the truth from a lie. They don't know right from wrong. I mean, if you believe in the scripture, it's the end times, because the night and the day are indifferentiable, whatever I'm trying to say. Because this is a big problem with information, and the foreign actors are taking advantage of it. And your intelligence committees in the Senate and the House will tell you there is so much false information. That's the way the president gets to say fake news, is because there's so much misinformation. When he says fake news, it resonates with people. And as a result, he uses as a political tool. We have got to come together in journalism schools of America, in my opinion, have to have systems to say this is fact and this is fiction, and ways to differentiate quickly if someone is telling the truth, or even a hologram of someone. Is it actually them? Is it authentic, or is it somebody made this up? This is a big problem in elections because decisions now are made on false information or false narratives. And so these are big issues we need to study right after this election. The Congress needs to take action, I believe, on this in a macro sense after we get to January the 20th.
I have nothing
Thank
to
you.
add. I think it's a great discussion. I think the FBI did its job. That's some more of the good news, Tim. They uncovered some of this, and I also echo tampering with the vote is different than launching disinformation campaigns.
Right.
Thank you. Several of our viewers are thinking about the courts, and perhaps Congressman Price, you could start here because you were once a sitting judge, and of course, Congressman Gephardt also has a JD. Tell us about how you think about the role of the courts. Is it right for candidates to just already be planning a series of lawsuits to challenge what the states determine? And is that another way to undermine the results, even if it's peaceful?
And no, I think that that's part of our system. I think that's the third branch of government that we're all entitled to use. It might delay, it might confuse, but that's what the courts are for. I do not think that that's a tactic that should be discouraged, because it also adds a level of confidence in the outcome when a court reviews it. In many people's minds, I think the court is probably the highest standard bearer we have when it comes to the confidence people have in government. But I think it's everyone's right to use the court system. And you're a dean of a law school. I think that the courts have a very important place in this. And just because people are preparing doesn't mean that they'll use it, but at least they'll have it prepared and it'll move faster than it would otherwise. I'm a firm believer that we should always have that outlet of our court system to back up the system of laws that we have in this country that served us so well.
Yeah, but as far as I can tell, both sides have really impressive teams of lawyers that have been at work for months already. This is not new.
Yeah.
And some of the things they've sued about or litigated about have gone their way, and some of them have gone the other way. And my sense is that most judges are really trying to enforce the law faithfully. They're not trying to be political. They're not trying to decide this election. And I have faith in the courts and the people who are judges in the courts to do exactly that. And the best way to avoid, ultimate litigation is for us to count these votes as quickly and accurately as possible.
There you go.
Result. The year 2000 was the perfect example of the system not being able to get its job done. And there's nobody to blame. It was very close and turned out. And at the end of that, I was sitting in my office with Al Gore's campaign manager. And on that Sunday, the Supreme Court decided. And so I said to Bill, what are we going to do? And he said, well, we got to call the candidate. And so we called Al Gore, and he said, well, we got to wait. We got to figure out what's going on. We don't know exactly what the decision says. But then next day, he walked out and said, we have to accept this decision to have peace in the country. And
that's a good thing to remind
that,
people of.
That's where we got to go.
Yeah, it's a good thing to remind people of.
Another good man from Tennessee, Zach.
Yeah. All right, Dr. Stout.
Okay, then let me move to a question from one of our viewers. This viewer is wondering if any of you can talk about the Postal Service and what's going on with the mail sorting machines and the controversy around removing those machines. And do you have concerns, or does your organization have concerns that the mail-in voting will be disrupted from our US Postal Service, from and by?
I'll start as a Republican to say that I think a lot of that was blown out of proportions on both sides. And yes, we can have confidence in the Postal Service. In fact, they process a whole lot more mail at Christmas time than they do during this election season. And yes, they're capable of it. Their capacity is there. No matter what anybody has said about it, anyone, including the President of the United States, they're totally capable of processing this much absentee mail. And it's going to take some time to count the votes. And under those state rules and laws, we need to give them that time to count the votes and then accept the results. But I have confidence the Postal Service is capable.
Thank you.
My mail carrier guarantees me that there will be no problem. So that's just a off the cuff comment from her, but she says, you can trust us. We're perfectly capable of doing this.
Okay.
And this was a case where you had lawsuits filed and the machines that people didn't want taken out had been put back. So I agree. I think the mail service is going to be okay. But people need to prepare for this early. And a lot of people have done that. Look at the lines that are people voting early because they don't want to use the mail or they don't want to be in a huge long line on election day. So people are responding and they're getting it done.
Nancy, I'd chime in and just say there are two parts of your question here. One is, for this election, are we in good shape? Congressman Womp mentioned a little earlier about our Reformers Caucus, this part of issue 1, where we are trying to work with Congress to make Congress work better, to clean up corruption, to increase the average citizen's vote and voice in Congress. And one of the things we did was to try to encourage, through the CARES Act, more money to invest in the Postal Service in our larger capacity of people voting by mail and voting by absentee ballot and so forth. When you have a coronavirus crisis, you have this COVID-19, you're going to have more people trying to vote in safe manners, especially, elderly and compromised people. So we were able to help get $400 million into that CARES Act to help the Postal Service and help delivery. But the longer term question here is, it's probably going to need more. We need to have a bigger look at this whole question of democracy. How do we come back together after this election? How do we restore civility? How do we improve civic education? How do we try to make sure that businesses are part of the effort for Patriots Days and, showing that we're all putting country above party to put our country in this exceptional place where we've always been as a people and being a beacon of hope to the rest of the world. What do we do about possibility of national service? I worked with Deborah Price and Dick Gephardt. I think Zach was just coming in to create AmeriCorps when I was in Congress. That was a bipartisan proposal to do that. What do we need to do in 2020 if we did that back in 1995? What do we need to do to modernize that? So what is this new look at restoring and refreshing democracy in the world today for the United States of America and our people? I think that's something that we're going to have to look at. No matter who's elected president, that should be on the agenda.
Great. One of our viewers asks, are the two most important voices in this controversy really the candidates? And are they the two people who need to speak the loudest about staying peaceful, about engaging in just the way that you all are suggesting as citizens who care about the country more than the party? I'm going to ask Congressman Womp to start out, because to you viewers, Congressman Womp said that he had an engagement on Twitter today with the President of the United States?
Well, the president said in a speech today that he thought we ought to know who the winner is on election day, and that it wasn't acceptable to not know on election day, and that it might even violate our constitutional not to know on election day. And I tweeted, this is where the candidates must both accept that every lawful vote must be counted according to the legal process in the respective states, and that the winner will be declared when the election is concluded. The loser must concede as well. Hashtag country over party. Well, that's taking him on, but listen, we all have a responsibility. Sure, they have big bully pulpits. This president learned that he could use Twitter and social media and completely counteract the national media, which Walter Cronkite called the fourth branch of the federal government. So he uses that. And so he says one thing and 172 million people immediately see it, and he has that bully pulpit. But that doesn't mean he's right. And he may be right on 80% of the things and wrong on 20. And we all have a right to speak our mind as to what's right and what's wrong. Whether we're in the 20 or the 80, we all have a voice in this country. And you can't change right from wrong no matter what you say if it's not right or wrong. You can't. And right is, this is the process under the law. The rule of law takes precedent over a candidate or even the president of the United States if he's not following the rule of law, Nancy.
Thank you. Here's a question that I think a lot of people probably have. In a federal election, why doesn't the federal government govern the standards?
Ooh.
Oh, that's a history lesson and a civics lesson. And I think that that's one thing that I would like to see happen after this election is for people to understand exactly the little speech that Tim gave as we got started here, the process, to have them understand the Electoral College. There's so much discussion about the Electoral College, but no one even understands how it works, why it was set up the way it is, why it's served us all these hundreds of years. But it's I can't even remember, Nancy, what your question is. I got so excited about the Electoral College. I'm sorry, but you know, there's a real place for us to try to educate ourselves in the midst of all this. People are really tuned in and are listening, and we're losing an opportunity if we don't take it to help people understand exactly why it's happening this way, what would happen if it didn't happen this way, and that it's why it was set up, the reasons that it has come to be over the years. And so whatever your question was, I hope that was somewhat answered it.
Let me follow up to say that one of the things I would hope that would come out of a commission is a set of national standards that states might look to on what are good practices. For instance, in my home state of Tennessee, we vote early and we vote safely early, and well over half of the electorate is already going to have their vote cast in the bank before election day. So if a storm blows through town, it's in the bank. We did it early. I think that states ought to be encouraged, maybe even incentivized, to have early voting so that people have more flexibility in how they cast their ballot. And even the whole absentee voting process, you know, it's ironic that so much noise has been made about absentee voting, but the president and his whole family voted absentee. All of our military votes absentee. Absentee upon request is an all-American proposition. Now, we can have an argument about whether every registered voter needs to be mailed a ballot in the mail, because I don't believe that. But I believe if you request one, regardless of your age, because you don't feel good about going to the precinct, maybe you're afraid of weather, maybe you're afraid of COVID, maybe you're afraid of violence. But whatever the reason, you ought to be able to vote at home and just ask for a ballot. And that ought to be a standard that we expect states to adhere to some of these standards. Then they can carry out the elections so that we're not federalizing everything, but we have a set of standards. It is a hodgepodge across the country. There are 9 states that vote all absentee, and 5 of them always have, and they've done it really, really well because they've been doing it a long time, and there's almost no error. 4 of them have added it this year. And the only one of those 4 states that's actually in play is Nevada. The other 3, all the electoral votes are going to go to one side or the other. So there's really no reason on the absentee voting question to question the outcome of this election. It's not going to really be an issue if you just wait and have patience for the votes that are legitimately and lawfully cast to be counted.
Great answers. Let me ask one final question to Ambassador Romer. Ambassador Romer, you talked before we opened up the panel for public discussion about the reality that the entire world is watching this election, not just Americans, but every democracy and many other countries. In fact, we might even have and probably will have European monitors. Could you talk a little bit about this background so that our viewers could understand?
Sure, Nancy. I was asked by our National Council on Election Integrity to speak with some of these monitors from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe this past Monday. And our State Department has to give approval for anybody to come into the United States and look at our election system. So they gave approval to this group, and they usually do to other groups to come in and give the United States the possibility of suggestions about how to do this better in the future. So we had a really interesting dialogue. Here are our European friends from Spain and Germany and France and Great Britain taking time in COVID, where it's dangerous for them to travel, but they come here and they're going to sit through our process, put out a report the day after about certain conclusions they reach, then take 2 months and write up a more thorough and sophisticated report about how they found this election process to run. Does it need more early voting in the future and more capacity for that? Will it need and require the Postal Service to have more resources? How do you incentivize, as Zach was just talking about, states to improve? MIT and Stanford do a joint study about ranking the 50 states. And some states are tailing back at the bottom, and others are always instigating and always improving themselves. How do we have this process of best practices really form incentivization so that everybody is trying to do better, so that voices can be heard in our great democracy, and show the world that we're not just the oldest democracy in the world, we do it the best as well too. We have a great tradition here. So I really found them to be very serious and potentially helpful. And back to the question that you asked previously about a history lesson of federal and states. Thomas Jefferson talked about our states being laboratories of democracy and experimenting. Missouri might do it different from Ohio, from my home state of Indiana and Tennessee, where we're all from on this conference call. I think that can be a really positive thing in our federalized republic, our system of government. And it can also protect, there's no centralized system for the Russians or the Iranians or Chinese to target. It's a system of secure and protected systems throughout the United States. So there are benefits to that as well.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you. Thank you for that. Congressman Gephardt, it looked like you were about to make a comment. Let me turn back to you. Did you have another comment on either the last question or this question?
I was just going to make the point that Tim just made, that a benefit of having 50 different election commissions is that it's much harder for foreign actors to hack into those complicated systems. We just had one system, it would be one target to hit at. So that's a benefit we get from that. There are problems that come from it, but as Tim just said, we're learning from one another. And I must tell you, tears to my eyes when I saw the lines of people trying to vote early in various states. It of when the people voted in Iraq for the first time, and other countries where they were just realizing democracy for the first time. I kind of feared that maybe Americans didn't care about this anymore, and they thought it was all crazy and not worth their time. But boy, when you see people standing in line for 6, 7, 8 hours on a Saturday to vote, it really restored my faith in the people. And remember one last thing. We, the people, this is self-government. And if you want to be a democracy, if you don't, look, our ancestors put 535 people in the room. That's Congress, not one. That means every decision is really hard and really complicated. But what do we get from that? What we get is that after a decision is made, the losers don't want to leave the country or pick up a rifle. If one person were making those decisions, you'd have us in a constant state of revolution. So this is a precious gift we've been given, and I'm happy to report, I think the American people still believe that, they get it, and they're going to do their part in self-government.
Thank you. We have just 4 minutes left and quite a few questions. So let me ask something that quite a few people think about. And perhaps if you respond to this, you could present your final comments to our listeners and our participants and our viewers. What do you think the chances are of any sort of electoral college reform or any other kind of election reform, perhaps Election Day as a federal holiday? Congressman Gephardt, I'm going to start with you.
There's been an effort on the Electoral College. First of all, you're never going to change the Constitution, so it's not even worth talking about. There is an effort for national popular vote. I don't know even if they get enough states to do it, that it will be okayed by the Supreme Court. I'm sure it'll be contested. So that's going on, and we can all talk about the Electoral College till the cows come home. We had a discussion in our group the other day, and somebody said, what are the Democrats on the council going to do if Democrats start saying this is not a valid election because the national vote winner didn't become president again, like it didn't last time in the year 2000? And my answer was, that's the law. I may not like that law. I may not like that process, but that's the process. And we're going to stick with it because that's the only way you keep rule of law.
Great answer. Congresswoman Price, do you have thoughts?
Well, I think that it would be a great time to review changing the date of the election. I think that would be an easy thing to do. If you review why we have it, when we have it on a Tuesday in the middle of a week, it dates back to when people were riding horses and farming the land and had to travel to the voting place. It was when many people, many Americans didn't have the right of suffrage. Only landowners and gentry, and certainly not women or people of color. I think it's a great idea. It's something that could be viewed as a reform. It would give people a chance to realize that their government is listening. Let's make this make more sense. But I believe in the Electoral College. One of the reasons I believe in it is because I really understand it. And I think the more people that can be educated to really have a deep regard for why it was put into place, we might not be so critical of it.
Thank you. Very, very helpful. That educational component is great. And we have 1 minute left. So Ambassador Romer, and then back to you, Congressman Womp.
Yes, I think there will be and there should be reform. Not just looking at the Electoral College and what works with it. Is it amendable? Are there things to improve in it? But our whole system of democracy needs to be refreshed, renewed, and reformed. From the influence of big money in politics, the billionaires are running too much of the show with special interest PACs and outside advertising into districts and states. People want to hear their own voices reflected in the representatives. and they don't want to stand behind in the line behind big moneyed interests and lobbyists and other things. So I think we will see. I'm optimistic about seeing some reforms. And lastly, I just say about voting and our democracy, I'm also optimistic. I stood in line for 3 hours and 5 minutes the other day to vote. I had coffee. I talked to people all around me. It was a great time. I think everybody was probably tired by the time they got to the inside the library, but everybody were acting like neighbors and friends and not enemies. And that's what we have to return to.
Nancy, let me say, you can argue both sides of the electoral college issue with impact. You can argue both sides of term limits or virtually every big issue, but it's not the system that's flawed. The system is beautiful. It's worked so well for 240 years. In effect, it's us and even the Congress. You can diss the Congress, but what is the Congress? It's a snapshot any given day of America. If you think Congress is corrupt, Americans have problems that create that Congress. We are literally, we got to come to terms with we're all people and we're Americans, and we should come together and respect each other and frankly recognize that hate and division is what happens in other parts of the world, and unity and love is what has prevailed and brought us back from the depths of our darkest hours. We must find that again. And if we do, this system is totally adequate to last another 240 years.
Thank you. You are a great panel. I truly appreciate all of your thoughts and your comments, Congressman Gephardt, Congressman Womp, Congresswoman Price, and Ambassador Romer. And I especially thank the Gephardt Institute for organizing this special evening. I know you are all busy. There is so much going on in our lives right now, and that we would have this amazing panel that would come and help us understand the issues is just a wonderful moment. And I'm going to just quote what you all started with. Let's all put country above politics and above party. Let's do it right this time, and I know we can. So thank you very much, and we look forward to next time.